By listening to this short ad, you are supporting our podcast. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There is creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Thank you. Hello, everyone. We are with Professor Bruce McGraw again, and I'm very happy to see him again. We will discuss today some important issues that are going on in America. Welcome, Bruce, to our YouTube and podcast. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you, and thanks for having me on your podcast again. I look forward to our conversations.
Thank you. Let me ask you this question. After what happened with George Floyd, it was an awful videotaped crime, and the saddening thing about it, it was like, imagine how many other stuff happened without being videotaped. So our country needs a real change in politics, and we need to face this racism and hate. What do you think about what's going on in the country? Just describe for me how you feel about what's happened and the protesting happening right now.
Well, I think what we're looking at here is, again, as I've talked about in the magical universes, I think the core of all of our problems is we need a new worldview. And I think our old worldview, the modern worldview, which, as I said before, has done a lot of good things for us, but it has its flaws. And I think one of the flaws is this need that we continue to see ourselves as separate from other people, separate from the environment, separate from the creatures of the environment. We're isolated, we're alienated from everything. And ultimately, it all comes down to the fact that because we're alienated from ourselves, we don't know who we are. And so if you look at, I would say we have three immediate issues that have popped up right now that are just completely inflaming the country and really the whole world. And the first one, obviously, is the pandemic. Yeah. And so the pandemic is this flu, this virus that we have that is caused, at least primarily, by the way we treat nature, that we've destroyed natural habitat, we've created all these extinctions of the different animals, we forced humans and animals to live closer together, and so viruses are going to spread. So it sort of shows how we're sort of detached from the environment. In fact, naturalist Jane Goodall said, if we look at this virus and we say we just get a vaccine and we cure it, everything will be fine and we can all go back to normal. Well, that's not going to happen because we're so close to the animals. There's going to be virus after virus after virus. And according to the naturalist Jane Goodall, if we don't change how we produce our food, it's going to lead to the end of humanity. And they just had a recent study out where scientists said that, this destroying all these habitats is going to eventually break down the ecosystem, and economies are going to crash, and it's going to be pretty bad. Yeah. The second big problem, obviously, is our social upheaval with the murder of George Floyd, and the fact it was so graphic that people saw that video of him literally getting the life crushed out of him. It was so emotional and so impactful that, it led to all of these demonstrations, not only here and not only among Black people, but among all different races and around the world are having a response to that. And this shows our disconnection from our fellow humans, that, and somehow we some people see these fellow humans as not humans at all. They're somehow lesser beings or objects or something. So again, there's this disconnect. Yes. And then we have the economic depression, which sort of grown out of this pandemic that we're in. And again, how we've responded to it shows that we sort of feel separate. We don't feel like we're in this together, and that some people, even the wealthy, continue to benefit from the packages that the Congress passes more than the people who really need it. And we don't feel the need to this connection with other people from that. And then the fourth one isn't one of the immediate ones, but it's the biggest one for me, which is climate change. And that's the result of our, again, not feeling connected to the planet, to the environment and whatnot. Yeah. And so, we can deal with each one of these problems separately. We just get a virus and that'll be okay. And hopefully these protests will die down. We get back to normal. But of course, that's not going to happen. Hopefully people go back to work and the economy will get back to normal. And we'll leave all these problems still there that need to be solved. Yeah. And so that's a worldview that sees everything as separate. We deal with the problems separately. But from my point of view, from the point of view of the magical universe, they're all interconnected. And they show a problem of a worldview. And so what we need to do is have a new worldview that shows in a deeper way that we're all interconnected. We're interconnected with each other. We're interconnected with the environment and all the creatures in the environment. And, basically we have to learn to live together or we're going to die together. Yeah. And I think especially the climate change problem really reveals how important that is. And these problems, from the pandemic to the climate change, really show how these problems are now global. And we need to come together as a global community to solve that. So I think we need a new worldview, and the basis of this new worldview, at least in my saying, I call it the magical universe. Another, I call it new mythology. And it gives sort of the intellectual framework in which to understand all of these problems that are happening. And so I really think we need a whole new, a global worldview to begin to look at these as all these problems are related to a deeper single cause. And we have to go to that deeper cause to solve these problems instead of just trying to pick them off one after the other. Yeah. And they just keep popping back up in more virulent forms.
Well, Professor, do you need to do what Pythagoras did? The famous Greek mathematician and philosopher.
Pythagoras?
Pythagoras. He did that. He was aware of the power of religion. So in order to bring people to his way, he created his own religion and his own school. So, do you need to make this like religion in order to bring people to it? Because I know many people who rush more toward let's say stories and proverbs and like this poetic language instead of the language of philosophy or science. So what do you think about that issue?
Well, I would, the term religion is kind of a loaded term. And as Socrates always say, you have to sort of define your terms. Okay. So if what you mean by, and I don't really like to use the word religion because of that, because usually you think of religion and you think of these set of principles and guidelines.
Spirituality? Can we say spirituality?
Yeah, I would say spirituality is a better term. It's more open-ended. Yes. Because I believe ultimately, the great teachers of all the major religions were all basically saying the same things. Yeah. And they're all pointing in the same direction. And they may call that ultimate end different names, but it's the same ultimate end. But the problem is the followers who came after them didn't quite have that vision that they are understanding that they had. And from their own point of view, they understood it in the way they understood it. And, as after the great teachers like Jesus or Buddha die, then it gets narrowed down by the followers who just don't have the wisdom to understand the true teachings. And so they narrow it down, they make it sectarian. And again, we get separate. So it's like my religion, the people, the believers, and then there's the non-believers who are going to go to hell or something, and they're not right.
Yeah.
And some other religion has the same view, and they may even go to war over their differences. And so one of the things I talk about in the magical universe is part of the evolutionary stage, because we talk about the whole evolutionary process, the whole creation story from the Big Bang up to now. And the end part of that is human beings go through an evolution of stages of consciousness.
Yes.
And so it's not like we're human beings and we're all at the same stage of consciousness. There are levels and stages of consciousness that get developed. And these, I didn't come up with these. These are has been going on. I think maybe we'll talk a little bit about Hegel or something later on. I mean, he talked a little bit about that. Marx talked about stages of history. But more modernly, I'm talking about people like Ken Wilber and Don Beck and Jean Gebser and Claire Graves, who have talked about these different levels of consciousness that humanity kind of goes through. And it's almost sort of like the levels of consciousness a baby goes through as it slowly develops into an adult. And so I think we go through these levels of consciousness, and we always see the world from that level of consciousness. And so the trick is to kind of move ourselves out of those levels of consciousness and to higher levels. And that happens when the stage of consciousness that we're in we start realizing there's flaws in it. And if we're willing to look at those flaws and take in new information and adjust our worldview, then we could potentially move up to the next stage. However, if we find new ideas coming in on our stage threatening and we shut down our minds,
yes,
then, we become, I guess you would say, more totalitarian, more intolerant, more isolated, alienated from the world outside. So it sort of becomes me or my group in here and then everybody else out there. And so I think, what we're talking about is just getting up to these stages of consciousness, higher stages of consciousness where, we feel this connection to each other, to the universe, to the environment, to the earth. And we realize from the universe story that, we are all one. And we always have to keep that in mind. We're all human beings. We're all interconnected and we're all one. And I think any kind of spirituality has to take that into account. And I think you're right. I mean, a lot of, myths and stories, that's why Jesus taught in parables.
Yeah.
Because stories always, myths or parables or whatever, you don't take them literally. They're not meant to be taken literally, but there's this deeper meaning in them. And sometimes you're right. Stories can evoke those deeper ideas because it forces you to look at things more metaphorically than literally.
Yes.
And so I think you're right. I think part of this new worldview is to begin to learn to look at things more metaphorically and not always so literally.
Yeah, but don't you think that, okay, for example, one of the problems I think with even with spirituality and like what Pythagoras did, I mean, bringing people to some habits, eat this, don't eat that, just like building his own cult, and then he started using his mathematics and his philosophy. I have seen the same thing happen with Nietzsche, for example. Some people would use his philosophy to say that he wanted to emancipate the individual and give him freedom, whether others would say, no, he was just another racist, he caused the rise of Nazism and so on. Don't you think that using, how can I say, like a Platonic, poetic language could be misleading again? Because when we talk about emotions and feelings, we get lost, I think. So how we can build a humanity and avoid this problem?
Well, I think part of the modern world, the worldview that I'm referring to, is really based on reason. And so, and there's nothing wrong with reason. Reason is great. It's done a lot of wonderful things. The modern world, as I said, has done a lot of wonderful things, but reason has its limits. And so, Ken Wilber talked about, he calls it, it's a new fallacy. He calls it the pre-rational and the post-rational fallacy. And sometimes people get those two mixed up. And the pre-rational fallacy would be sort of more like the age of faith, where you just have faith in certain things, which in some ways I think is what you're talking about. Yeah. And if you have faith, and then like I have faith in the Bible's creation story, but then science comes along and tells me, it's not true, and it gives me all this evidence that shows it's not true. And I just go, well, I'm not even going to listen to the science. I have my faith. That's all I need. I'm going to shut that out. That would be pre-rational. Post-rational, and so pre-rational rejects reason if it conflicts with their faith. But the post-rational is different. It's not getting rid of reason. It's just saying reason can only take you so far. It has limits. And so you take in all of the science, you use your reason. It still has a role to play. It's not like you just get rid of it like the pre-rationalist, but you realize reason has its limitations. And so reality is much too big for our rational minds to contain. The Taoist, Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, he says, those who know it, he's speaking of the Tao, which is sort of their ultimate reality, those who know it don't speak of it, and those who speak of it don't know it. Meaning it's too big. Human beings, we can't put it in our mind. And so after a while, you can use your mind. You should always use your mind. But there comes a point where you just have to let that go and experience the totality, the oneness of everything. But that doesn't mean you just throw out your reason. So, if somebody's playing on your emotions, I think we have to bring our reason back in and see, does it make sense what they're saying? And so reason always has a role to play, because you're right. I mean, if you throw out reason and go back to just emotions, then, you can be easily manipulated. Yeah. And I think you need the combination. But the problem with the modern world is that it was reason without the emotions and the feelings. At least they played a very secondary role. Yeah. And, part of the revolution against the modern world, what they call the postmodernists, also part of the Romantic movement in the 19th century against the modern world. So we move into this postmodernism that sort of pointed out all the flaws of modernism. So the way I look at this is we want to take the best of the modern world and the best of the complaints of about the modern world of the postmodernists, and we need to synthesize them together into what some people have called an integral stage of consciousness. We don't throw reason out, but we still use it, but we understand more its proper role, and it does have an important role. Because you're right, emotions can run away with us. So we do need reason to temper things a little bit, to make sure things make sense, so we don't get taken in by, the David Koreshes and some of these people who come around giving us all this stuff. I think David Koresh was the guy at Waco. And from my remembering of that, the thing that really impressed people is he had some kind of a photographic memory, if I remember this correctly, because I don't have a photographic memory. But he was able to remember a lot of Bible passages just by his own memory. And so he was able to spew these out all the time. And that just really impressed people. So they thought, wow, this guy's really good. But he just had a good memory. And he was able to throw these things out there. So he was able to trick people.
They thought that he had a relation with God, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you need reason to kind of come in and take care of that. And to have critical reason, critical thinking is very important, but it does have its limits. It can't explain everything. It can't explain the beauty of a flower, or it can't tell if you're going to fall in love with somebody, if this is the right person or not. So the emotions, the feelings, the intuitions, they have their role to play too, and we need to learn how to have a better balance between the two.
Yes. There is a comedy show in the Middle East, and it's in Arabic, and they were talking about what's happening in America right now. and the guy who makes the show, he said, "Hey, Trump, you don't have, um, you cannot use religion in politics. That only allowed here in the Arab world, not in America." So he was joking, but I mean, we are seeing where we are heading here in America. I mean, bringing the Bible into politics, and especially with this all tension going on. Uh, don't you think that we have gone like backward, even for decades or more than decades? I believe. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that we're kind of going backwards, but sometimes in evolution, like you move to the next stage in evolution and you sort of hit that status quo for a while, and then there's sometimes it's this slide back, sort of like a wave, when it breaks on the shore, then it kind of goes back out again. So sometimes I think we hit at a new stage, we hit a like it's almost like a renaissance, that's what like a rebirth. That's sort of the Renaissance was kind of the new stage out of the Middle Ages. And then over time, the ideas, the freshness gets, I would say, calcified.
Yes.
They become, instead of being inspiring new ideas where people get new ideas, people start clinging to ideas and their minds close. And there always seems to be this things start going back again. Yes. And then I think that in some cases, maybe that's what's needed to begin to see the real flaws of a certain order, certain worldview. And then it becomes so, as it falls back, it becomes so evident that this worldview is no longer tenable, that gives the impetus to then make a leap forward into a new worldview. Because now I just think it's becoming more and more plain that everybody can see the modern worldview that we have now just doesn't work anymore. And it's just becoming ever more clear, I think, out there. And you hear these protesters on the street talking about the need for a new moral revolution, that somehow, the way the police are treating the black people and the way we're treating the environment and the way police are treating other people and the way the government, treats certain people and not other people. It whole thing needs a moral revolution instead of, kind of this kind of individuality that we have now. That's, I'm just worried about getting mine. I'm not so worried about you.
Yes. Yeah, but what do you think? Like, why these things don't happen much in other countries? Let's say, for example, in Canada or France or even Germany. I mean, these racist actions of police or other groups, they are more. We see them more here in America. So, what's wrong with America specifically? I mean, that is one of the biggest questions I have, and I don't know if you have an answer for it here.
Well, I mean, in Europe, we did see, when the refugees were coming in, there seemed to be a lot of kind of racism and whatnot about letting immigrants in and whatnot. So I think, we did see it there.
Yes.
I don't know what the racial breakdown of those countries, but I think the U.S. is unique in the fact we have such racial diversity in this country, and we're still dealing in some ways with these issues in a way maybe other countries don't.
Yeah.
But I think, we're so ripe for a big change here, and you can really see it in the young people, because now if you look at these demonstrators, it's not just black people, it's people from all races and creeds and religions, and everybody looked at that episode and thought, not everybody, but the vast majority of people, thought it was terrible. And so I think, and you see the young people together of different races, they seem to be getting along better. They seem to naturally get along better. So in some ways, it's like they're already embodying this new worldview that, that we're all in this together, and it's a ground up grassroots movement that's garnering more and more support. And I think, so I think, even though it seems worse here right now, I think, we are planting the seeds for a big leap forward if we do this correctly. If they can channel that energy into kind of a political movement to begin to clear out what I would say is a lot of the dead wood that's holding on to old ideas, and we can open it up. And I think, if we look at just the response to the pandemic, I think just about every other advanced country is taking much better care of their citizens. They have monthly stipends that are getting sent out to people, whereas here they're not doing that. So they're making life very much more difficult. And, I don't know, America, I guess they had to put Trump in there to wake up to this reality. If we were a little smarter, maybe we wouldn't have to go through this. But even though he didn't win, he got in. At least he didn't win the popular vote. He got in. And so, and now we just have to make sure we get him out in November.
Yes. Yeah, very true. I mean, I consider him to be a dangerous fellow because just like General Mattis said yesterday, that Trump not even pretending to unite the American people, he actually trying to divide us. Yeah, I mean, that was a big thing to hear from someone who was working within the administration.